we have another shock poll about the.
Where's our shock poll music?
Yeah, right. We need shock poll music.
Dun dun dun.
We put out a shock poll segment last week for our Patreon members, and so now we're putting out a public shock poll video. These shock polls are getting so often, they're happening so often that they're really not shock
they're not
polls
shocking anymore.
Yeah,
shocking.
They're kind of losing all the pizzazz that they ought to have.
But this one, the shock poll would be like majority of public approves of Biden's performance in office.
Right, exactly.
That would be the shock poll.
What
we're getting is like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the ABC and Washington Post poll came out, which spelled real trouble. I mean, massive trouble for Democrats in 2022. Amongst registered voters, they are now at -10 against Republicans on the generic ballot, meaning 51% of registered voters say they are inclined to vote Republican in the midterms, 41% are inclined to vote Democrat. Now, amongst all adults, the numbers were better for Democrats. It was Republicans +3. But the reason the registered voter number is getting a lot of focus is that tends to correlate better to midterm results, since midterm elections tend to be lower turnout. And so the registered voter polls are usually more accurate than the all adults number polls. To give you an example of just how bad this is, in 2010, the Tea Party red wave had Democrats losing on the generic ballot by 3. It was Republicans +3. Yeah. So if it's Republicans +10 next year,
Republicans tend to be undersampled on top of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it's Republicans +5, that's going to be a historic.
That's a wipeout.
Exactly.
So 10. Yeah, it's a little sad what you see happening, because at this point, our politics feel to me like you got a sinking ship that's foundering, and the rats run to this side, and then the boat goes this way and they're getting drowned again, so they run to the other side, and then it tips this way and they're trying.
Well, sure.
That's what we are. It's just they keep trying to go to the other side, and it sucks. So, then it's not that the Republicans are offering anything in particular. It's just they don't know how else to express their displeasure with the state of things. And then the Republicans are going to get in there and fuck them over. And then they're going to run back to the, and meanwhile, fucking, Bezos goes to space.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly has been the trend, the sort of pendulum swing in terms of, the out party losing seats in the midterms, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. This is worse.
It seems more extreme now.
Well, the reason why this is more extreme now is because the Democrats really did have a chance this time. Because when Biden won, they got the stimulus checks out the door. Then, they started putting vaccines in people's arms. And then they started talking about this infrastructure package with the Build Back Better add-on. And we thought, okay, if they can get those things passed, if they could get a real human infrastructure bill passed, that might do something to drive turnout and keep the numbers, at least decent for Democrats in 2022. But that has not happened. Of course, the infrastructure negotiations have completely imploded, and dissatisfaction with Biden's performance, as well as public support for policies that the Democrats are not passing, are all factored into this same poll. So kudos to Real Clear Politics for actually sharing the Google spreadsheet with all of the data from this poll. So I'm going to share this now. And I think these numbers are actually quite interesting. So in the first column here, column C, you have all adults. And then in column D, you have registered voters. All right. So for simplicity's sake, just so my eyes don't hurt, I'm going to go with the all adults one. Okay. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Joe Biden is handling his job as president? 41% approve, 53 disapprove. That's pretty much in line with his recent numbers. Do you approve of Biden's handling of the economy? 39% approve, 55% disapprove. If you also look at this column here, column G, you'll see Biden's ratings among Democrats. Okay. even among Democrats, Biden's approval rating is at 80%. That's pretty weak for a Democratic president. I mean, Barack Obama was never under 90% with Democrats. Donald Trump was never under 90% with his party. So that's a weak number right there, which signals a big turnout problem. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Biden is handling COVID? 47% approve, 49 disapprove. Among
That's
registered
rough.
voters here, he's at -7 there. The fact that his numbers aren't terrible there is, a tiny ray of hope if you are a Democrat.
Very, very tiny, because he got elected purely on COVID.
Early on.
So if he's not winning on that, he's done. What are you going to win on?
Well, sure.
At that point.
But here's where this poll gets very interesting. And here are the numbers that you have to cite for anybody who is saying that he's losing because he's going too far to the left. Right. Do you support or oppose the federal government spending $1 trillion on roads, bridges, and other infrastructure? 63% support, only 32% oppose. Do you support or oppose the federal government spending about $2 trillion to address climate change and to create or expand preschool health care and the other BBB proposals? 58% support, only 37% oppose. 58% of independents support a $2 trillion human infrastructure package, the likes of which was put forward by Sanders and until very recently was what the CPC was holding out for. So numbers are very, very strong for both the $1 trillion bill and a potential $2 trillion add-on, which of course we're not going to get. Here's another interesting result. Biden has been president for about 10 months. Would you say he has accomplished a great deal during that time? A good amount, not very much, or nothing at all. Net, a great deal, good amount, meaning he's accomplished a good amount, only 35%. Not very much, little or nothing, 63%. So you have pretty solid approval for the infrastructure programs, but you only have a third of people who feel that he's gotten a significant amount done. So those numbers are about flipped. Go down here. Is Biden keeping most of his major campaign promises or not? 31% yes, 51% no. Now, here's where the electorate gets stupid, right? How concerned are you at all that Biden will do too much to increase the size and role of the government in U.S. Society? 59% say they are concerned, yet 38% say they are not, which is the complete opposite of their response on the human infrastructure bill, education, healthcare, and things like that. So like 60% want increased spending, yet 60% are also concerned about the role of the government in U.S. society.
Well, but that's the thing. That's such a vague question. And I think when you ask a question like that, people are thinking culture. They're thinking control of the internet. They're not thinking fixing my bridge that's falling down in my city.
Yeah. And we are actually getting to that because the last couple of questions here are actually speak to that. Would you describe the state of the nation's economy these days? Excellent, good, not so good, or poor? Only 29% say the economy is good, 70% poor. That's a miserable number for an incumbent, obviously. How much, if at all, do you blame Biden for the current rate of inflation? That's about 50-50. 48% say they do blame him. 50% say they don't blame him. I'm not going to read through all of these abortion measures, but generally, as you can see here, overwhelming support for reproductive rights. Just about every way you phrase it. So this was a very pro-choice sample here, which again signals that on the issues, people are more inclined to support Democrats if Democrats actually fight for the issues that they say they want to fight for. This is not an issue. This is not a sense of the country has gone completely right wing. I think the issue here is that you have a completely feckless, corrupt, and impotent Democratic Party that cannot deliver on a lot of the promises that people sincerely wanted them to deliver on. That's why I say, like, this cycle is a little different from the standard, okay, we're going to vote the out party in during the off year. And you know what I mean? It's not quite that same dynamic this time. Global warming. Overwhelming support for climate change mitigation measures here. If you look at the spreadsheet, again, there are a few different questions. For the sake of timing, I'm not going to read through the text of all of those. Do you think global warming is an urgent problem? Blah, blah, blah. Regulation of greenhouse gases, overwhelming support for that. This is interesting. Right now, are you inclined to vote to re-elect your representative in Congress, or are you inclined to look around for someone else to vote for? Only 26% say they are inclined to re-elect their member of Congress. 58% say they are inclined to look around. That's a bit of an interesting result here. We're almost done. There's not too many more. This is the generic ballot question that got the headline. As you can see, among all adults, Democrats only down by 3. Among registered voters here, Democrats down by 10, 41 blue, 51 red. That would be a historic, if not unprecedented, disaster if those numbers hold. Because given all of the gerrymandering, even if Democrats are +2 or 3 on the generic ballot, they're likely to lose a lot of seats. So if they're minus 10, that's, I mean, you're talking about
between that, the gerrymandering, the voter laws. We've been saying this for a while. This 2 years is the end of Democratic rule in this country for a generation, in my opinion. Like, if not forever, we're probably, you could argue we don't have it anymore as it is, but the last vestiges of the last pretense of democracy is about to be swept away in the United States, because the Republicans have made it clear that at this point, they're not even going to try to accede to the idea of free and fair elections. Like, that's out the window. So with the kind of power they're going to have after 2022 and 2024, they're going to effectively abolish elections in all but name. It's going to be impossible to remove them from office after that.
Yeah, well, this is right. I mean, that speaks to what you've been saying. Now, here's the interesting. So we've looked at several different policies. We looked at the infrastructure, both the bipartisan infrastructure package and the human infrastructure package. We've looked at reproductive rights. We've looked at climate change mitigation. Democrats had overwhelming support on just about all of those issues. Yet, look at question 20A and B. Do you think the Republican Party is in touch with the concerns of most people, or is it out of touch? Only 37% say they are in touch. 58% say they're out of touch. But look at this. Ask that same question of Democrats, despite agreeing with Democrats on just about every issue. Only 33% of voters said Democrats are in touch with the concerns of most people. 62% no. So despite having all that popular support on all these issues, they still lose to Republicans on the question of who is most in touch with our needs. And that does speak to culture and signaling and messaging and language. Absolutely, which I'm sure we will talk about in a little bit, but we're almost done. So let me just plow through these. Better job handling schools, pretty much even there. Democrats +3 over Republicans there. Thinking about your school district, do you think policies relating to the COVID pandemic are too strict, have gone too far, not enough? 53% say they're about right. 16% say not enough, too strict, 25. So that's a kind of even split there, more or less. Although, generally speaking, 53% are pretty satisfied with the situation, the COVID protections in the schools. Now, here is the interesting part, or an interesting part. I think all these numbers are actually quite interesting as a politics geek. But these last two questions are fascinating, especially as they pertain to the Virginia results a couple weeks ago. How much say should parents have in what their child's school teaches? A lot, some, or not much at all. 81% say they should have a lot or some say in what their child learns in school. Only 17% say not much, not at all. Now look at the next question. How much do you think public schools should teach about how the history of racism affects America today? A great deal, a good amount, not so much, or not at all. 70% say they should teach about the effects of racism a great deal or a good amount. Only 27% say not so much, not at all. So when you hear the Joy Reid line saying, well, critical race theory is just code for I don't want my white kid learning about Black history, these numbers seem to refute that. It's not that people are overwhelmingly opposed to teaching the history of race relations, and racism in school. It's that they don't like being shut out of the conversation by bureaucrats and politicians like Terry McAuliffe, who the polling data also signals that they believe are out of touch with their needs, right? And so you have a real divide here between like the meat and potatoes, dollars and cents issues and the way Democrats are perceived as leaders. That to me is the real split here, where like people are mostly with Democrats on issues. The problem is the Democrats don't fight for the issues. They don't follow through on the issues because they don't really care about the issues. But they basically have this sort of elitist mentality, this out of touchness that people pick up on. And they're sort of, they don't want to deal with feedback from ordinary people. And I think that explains a lot of the results there. I think that explains just about everyone. I mean, we just read through like 25 questions, and that would be my overall diagnosis based on all of those numbers.
Well, and I think this dovetails nicely with the Jacobin article that recently came out showing that working class voters respond very negatively to woke language, but they respond positively to appeals to racial justice. It's a question of how you present that. If you start getting into a lot of jargon, if you start making it very clear that this is coming out of your academic training and some kind of critical theory discipline, turns them right off, because now it's not even about race at that point. It's about class. And this is a big part. That's a big blind spot for Democrats. They don't realize when they start talking like that, it's not even about what you're talking about. It's about the class signaling that kind of language connotes, not just to white people, to people.
Oh, sure.
To people. Democrats, this was another study that just came out. Democrats are losing people, not white people, average people. People with all races, across all demographics. They're losing people because this is how they're presenting themselves, and it's a big turnoff. I mean, we saw that in the last election where all these very, left referendums passed, legalizing marijuana, taxing the rich. These things all passed on their own without a Democrat attached to it. If you just run those questions without a Democrat, they do just fine. I do believe this is the only hopeful thing I will say. I do believe that what happened in Virginia is the beginning of a little bit of a sea change. And also these studies that are starting to come out. In the end, there's only so much you can struggle against reality, especially when the people who are promoting this, wokeness are really a tiny minority of the population. Like there's only so long you can keep a kind of cultural revolution footing going in the face of a overwhelming rejection of it by the culture. And how many elections are you going to lose before you start telling the most virulent, off-putting people in your coalition to shut the fuck up? You got an election to win. How long are you going to ape their language? The problem for Democrats, and this is a problem that really starts with the new Democrats and the third way Democrats, is once you're not going to stand up for economic principles, that shit is all you got. And that's a trap the Democrats boxed themselves into that they have not figured out how to extract themselves from. And they get so much money from their donors for distracting people with these culture war issues. They might just not even care whether they win or not. But it seems like you have to exercise some power to even be worth driving.
Well, sure,
so
of course.
So at some point, they need to address this problem, that their cultural signaling is an enormous turnoff to people of all races, of all political stripes. It's perceived as extremely elitist and divisive. And you need to go back to a language of liberal universalism and bread and butter unifying issues. That doesn't mean you can't address social equity. Don't call it that. You know what? Don't call it that, okay? Because as soon as they start hearing those things, they're talking down to me now. Now they're talking down to me, right? And now you've lost that voter. Just
Yeah, and there's no reason. There's no reason to put people on the defense like that.
right.
There's just no
Exactly.
reason to.
Exactly. Exactly.
There is no political payoff to. There's no practical reason to. There's no ethical reason to. You can just talk to people like people.
Well, you have to
make
remember,
a case about how these policies will lift all boats. If the Democrats did tweak those dials, if they turned down the signaling and turned up the passage of legislation so that people could actually see those opinions realized, then I guarantee you Democrats would not be perceived as more out of touch with people's needs than the GOP, because they wouldn't be talking down to them as much, and they'd be passing things that materially improve people's lives. So you add those two things up, and of course they're going to think that you're more in touch with a party that clearly has no interest in the empowerment of ordinary people, right? And so that's what it would take. The problem is the Democrats are too beholden to big money to actually go to bat for ordinary people themselves. And so you're just left with a culture war that the Democrats cannot win.
Right. Anytime it turns to culture war, that favors the GOP. And it really shows you how the Democrats, they have a tremendous capacity to take what could be a really productive cultural conversation and not get the benefits of it. Because look, after George Floyd, the polling showed 80% of people wanted police reform. 80% of people. But that doesn't jive with the narrative of a society built on white supremacy and racism and microaggression. It doesn't fit the narrative. So instead of going out and embracing those people and bringing them into your coalition and saying, let's work together to try to make some progress in this problem, instead they antagonize those people with their woke virtue signaling. And look, a lot of the people who take the lead on that, they know where their bread is buttered. A lot of these people are raking in a lot of money in their not-for-profit organizations by being inflammatory. That they need an enemy. It is not good for those organizations and their fundraising to say the American people are with us. It's all about opposition, right? We live in a racist society. So you never saw them talk about, you should be thrilled that 80% of the American people are with you, right? Did you ever hear them talk about that?
Right. Well,
the people are for what we're for.
Well, look,
they didn't say that.
Terry McAuliffe went all in on trying to gin up black turnout and really beef his margins among African American voters by dying on the hill of, we're going to teach Toni Morrison in the schools whether you like it or not. Right. And just like he went all in on the black vote, which a lot of times Democrats have to. But if you look at what happened, and this was an untold story of Virginia, Youngkin got 13% of the black vote. 13% of the black vote is massive for a Republican. Massive. They're not supposed to get more than 7 or 8% tops. Democrats are supposed to be between 92 and 96% of the black vote. Mm-hmm. So the fact that McAuliffe underperformed, despite, centering his campaign on an issue that he thought was going to appeal to black people, turns out it only appealed to guilty, college-educated white people. And there weren't enough of them to put him over the top. And even a lot of them voted against him for other reasons, because a lot of them are rich and Republican for a reason. And so they voted for the, what did Anise call him? Like the red fleece vest guy. They found a square Republican that they could put up that wasn't too offensive, wasn't too Trumpian. And of course they voted for him over Terry McAuliffe. And so that was one of the untold stories out of there, is that he lost a lot of black support to the GOP, despite running a very, very quote unquote woke campaign, or at least gave it the old college try.
Well, for one thing, a lot of black people are culturally conservative. Not all, not maybe not even a majority, but that's a large
I think a
percentage.
majority do consider. I read a poll. I don't have this information with me, so I don't want you to quote me on this, but something like 25% of black people actually consider themselves quote unquote liberal. Most of them are
Okay,
Democrats, but most of them don't admit to being liberal.
right,
Which
right.
makes sense. I mean,
Well, I mean, the black church has
right,
a large
right,
impact on the community, and it's
right,
I mean, I can see it. I live in Harlem. You know,
sure,
before pre-pandemic, when you were out on a Sunday, man, everyone was wearing their Sunday clothes and
right.
going to church. Um, so yeah, you're alienating a certain percentage of the communities of color you claim to represent. And there's another thing. For people who are so sensitive about white savior narratives, you guys really have a funny habit of speaking for the interests and beliefs of these communities, don't you? I can think of no better example of the white savior complex in action than the repeated attempt to impose Latinx on a people that do not want it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You know, who the fuck are you to tell them that their language is wrong? that
Right.
their language is sexist. Who are you to tell them that? I thought you don't believe in it, white people coming in and doing this. You're just like these 19th century Victorians coming in, and they're going to save the benighted minorities in these slum neighborhoods, right? I mean, you're just like them.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe wherever you saw it, on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Facebook. We have channels on all three of those platforms. Also, consider helping us create more content by becoming a member at patreon.com/do dissidents, or on Facebook, where you can become a supporter right through our Facebook page and get bonus content every week, as well as call-in access to our live stream shows. Thank you very much for your continued support.